Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. I'm the host and creator, Sandy Rosenthal. And today we have a guest with us from the wonderful state of Maryland, and his name is Steve May. Hi, Steve.
Hello, nice to see you. Thank you for having me on your show.
You're very, very welcome. This is going to be a fascinating, uh, fascinating discussion, and our listeners are going to find out really quickly why as soon as they hear a little bit about my guest today, Mr. Stephen May. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about him right now before we get started. Steve May is a former Purdue pharmaceutical rep who turned whistleblower by filing a qui tam, which is a False Claims Act lawsuit, against Purdue Pharma in 2010. He alleged that Purdue falsely marketed OxyContin as being twice as potent as morphine, contributing to the opioid crisis through overprescription and healthcare fraud. His efforts highlighted the unethical practices within the pharmaceutical industry and the need for corporate accountability. When Steve was with Purdue, he was a representative who covered southwestern Virginia and parts of southern West Virginia. And he now lives in Ellicott City, Maryland. Anyone in listening who has seen the miniseries Dope Sick, which is adapted from the book by Beth Macy, knows that that's where it all started, West Virginia. So we are talking to someone today, we'll be listening to someone today who was there when this all started. And I, for one, just can't wait to hear what you have to tell us today. So take it
Yeah,
away.
I tell you what, you bring up that Netflix series, and I started watching it with my wife, and I was blown away because I felt like was going to start having PTSD because, this was hitting so close to home. I'm going, man, this is my territory. I covered the parts of southwestern Virginia that is mentioned so much in that series, and in fact, it was in my territory. Well, in a little county right outside of my territory that Purdue ended up settling with the government for like $600 million on their criminal conviction for the way that they sold OxyContin. So yeah, that's you mentioned that series, and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, that really hits close to home. But
Do you think any of the characters in the miniseries are based on you, possibly?
um, I think I think a lot of it, you know, you I think there probably was. If I can say it was specifically me, maybe not. However, I can say that I think a lot of the things that they covered into the character of the rep in that show was a combination of different people within the company, So was it only me? No. Was it a combination of me and probably 25 other people? I would say that's probably pretty accurate, but I don't want to
No.
step on the writers. But going back, out of college, I went into law enforcement. My goal was to go down the law path, but after a few years of that, I ended up getting a job with a pharmaceutical company that moved me from Hampton Roads, Virginia, over to southwestern Virginia, and I got into the pharmaceutical industry and started selling medications. And then about a year and a half into that, a recruiter from Purdue contacted me and said, "Hey, we have a sales opportunity with Purdue. Would you like to join them?" And quite frankly, at the time, this is back in 1999, Purdue was one of the highest paid, paying pharmaceutical companies in the industry. They had a phenomenal reputation within the industry as a really high professional company to work for. And I was like, absolutely, I wanted to jump in on this and have the opportunity to join that company. So I did. And I started selling OxyContin in southwestern Virginia. Went through training, entered my territory in January of 2005. And it did not take very long for the opioid epidemic to hit me right across the nose. I had a training manager that was riding with me one day who in the previous year, she was the number one OxyContin sales rep in the country. She comes to ride with me and train with me, and we go out and visit doctors. And I was in Lewisburg, West Virginia, and to talk to a doctor about prescribing OxyContin. And she said, "Oh, can you come into my office? I want to talk to you." And she mentions to me that the previous weekend her niece had overdosed on OxyContin, and she said, "I'm not going to be prescribing that drug anymore." And even to a rep who had been with Purdue a number of years, a seasoned rep, that caught her by surprise. And, obviously we report it to the company, and I think to myself, I mean, this is awful. Here I am, less than 2 or 3 weeks into working for this company, and doctor says I had a relative who died using your product. I continued to work for Purdue for the next 4 years. And really during that time, it was, I had really bought into the need to treat pain, because treating pain, if it's not treated, can lead to debilitating life for somebody. So I bought into the message of wanting to treat people who have pain. And I also had the responsibility as a rep to do what my company was paying me to do. But I can tell you that during that first year and a half that I was with the company, I mean, that's when in 2000, that's when the opioid crisis really started to form itself. I mean, I would say that was the very beginning of the epicenter of it. And we worked hard. I mean, the company, I think it was several years before they really realized how big of a problem that they had, probably not until 2002. And then, in 2004 was my last year with the company. I left right at the beginning of 2005. But about 5 years after that, Angela Radcliffe reaches out to me, and her husband was my manager. He was the one that hired me. She said, "Hey, do you remember back when you were selling the OxyContin that you would make a claim to the doctors that oxycodone would cost less, if somebody had an objection about the cost of the prescription. Do you remember selling them on the concept that, well, no, doctor, OxyContin is less expensive than morphine because it's got a 2-to-1 potency ratio versus morphine, meaning one oxycodone, whatever milligram, let's say 20 milligrams of OxyContin would be equivalent to 40 milligrams of MS or morphine." Yeah, I remember doing that. And she mentioned to me, "Did you know that that was a false claim?" And so she went on, and I realized that she invited me to join the lawsuit, which was Angela May versus Purdue. And we brought this lawsuit against the company because they had made a false claim. They had taken a clinical study that was legitimately done. It's a 1-day single dose study to make a claim that OxyContin was a 2-to-1 conversion to morphine. And when the reality is that there's a metabolite in morphine that accumulates in the body, and when you take morphine over and over throughout many days, what happens is the conversion becomes a 1-to-1 conversion, not a 2-to-1 conversion. And so really, um, that speaks to the efficacy of the product. And that conversion was a false claim in the sense that there were several impacts that it had on the medical community. It caused for, in some cases, for some patients being underdosed when they needed more medication. It caused some
Mm.
patients to be overdosed if they needed less medication, because that was not an accurate conversion. So we brought that case to the court, and it was in the court system for a couple of years. It was initially dismissed, and we won on appeal, and then the company appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said basically that lower court decision stood. Then we went back to trial, and during which we go through discovery, and we're given thousands and thousands of documents relating to our case, and I learned a lot during that time. I learned that you know that the company, they knew that this claim that they were making was a false claim, you know, and they had a lot of pushback within the medical community. They had pushback within regulatory agencies from other countries, about making this claim about the product. And quite frankly, you know, our case was dismissed a second time, in which we were not able to win that second dismissal. However, I learned enough to know in the process that I believe in my heart of hearts that if we had been able to go through the entire process in court, we would have been able to demonstrate that not only did Purdue know that they had made a false claim, that it was in fact a false claim. Not only that, but the FDA knew that it was a false claim. And I personally believe that this drug should never have been approved in the first place. And had they not made this false claim, and perhaps many others, knowing the way that they are, um, this product probably would not have come to market. They would not have had the profitability that they had. And as a result, I think we would not have seen the opioid epidemic become what it became.
This technicality, is it too technical to describe to our listeners?
It can get confusing.
Okay,
Um,
so it's not really worth it. But would
no,
it be
no,
fair to say would it be like that it was filed a day late or something? I mean, that a technicality had nothing to do with the merits of the case, but got thrown out, right? But thrown out because of some rules, or some I wasn't dotted, or some T wasn't crossed. But here, go on.
yeah, that's it. Okay, on technicality, yes. Basically, it was based upon where did I get the information about this this lawsuit? Because Mark Ratcliffe, Angela Ratcliffe's husband, who was my boss, he had brought this case several years earlier, and his case was dismissed on the basis that he had signed a covenant not to sue when he was severed from the company, and that was enough for the court to dismiss his case.
Okay.
Well, mine was dismissed, over the court's opinion that the way that I found out about this had been determined to be, what's the word that they used? The way that I found out about it, oh, I'm missing a word that they used, but
But that's okay. You can tell us in
yeah.
English anyway. So what did they mean?
Um, it basically I mean, I had firsthand knowledge about the way that we promoted this drug. I
You,
remember promoting the drug based upon this conversion ratio.
you were
Um,
there. Yeah.
I was there, but I wasn't the first person who brought the case. And there's some legalities about in key tam law, you can't bring a case because you heard somebody else brought the case years previous, you know. But they dismissed it a second time. It's kind of interesting when I think about it. The technicality that it was dismissed on the second time was almost identical to the technicality that was dismissed on the first time.
Hmm.
It's just so happens to be that the judge did a much better job in probably the higher court's opinion in writing her opinion about why it should be dismissed, that it became too difficult for us to overcome that dismissal. So quite frankly, I believe that not only I believe that the government did not want this case to succeed. The Department of Justice didn't, because we would have been able to implicate the fact that the FDA knew that this was a false claim that led to the approval of the claims that we were making to the market,
It
and it
wasn't
led to the opioid
solely
crisis.
about Purdue and singly about Purdue. It was much broader than that. And you feel that, am I interpreting this right? That's what they were
Yeah,
afraid of.
I think they were afraid that the FDA was going to get hit with the knowledge that we were able to, well, with what we were going to be able to demonstrate after discovery. And we were also going to take the executives of Purdue um, through deposition and such. And I just do not believe that the Department of Justice wanted to see this particular case succeed,
When you
which is
were,
sad.
yeah, I know. When you were, so the case is dismissed, it's over.
Mhm.
Have you perceived any fallout, toward you for the steps you had taken the past couple of years with this lawsuit?
Yeah, my this lawsuit, I think it failed in 2015, I believe, for the last time, and we appealed, um, and the appeal didn't, we didn't come out on top that time. Personally, yeah, being a whistleblower is tough. When you go out there and you tell the world that your company had committed crimes or had committed fraud or hurt somebody, that means that the type of people who do that are typically not the kind of people that companies want to hire in the future. So yeah, it's been difficult finding work since then, because who wants to hire somebody that sued their previous employer? Um, did I feel like that there was pushback, while I was in the middle of the lawsuit? Yes, I do. I felt the pressure of Purdue. I mean, they told us over and over, hey, if you keep doing this, we're going to come after you. We're going to sue you. Um, those threats are already there, and a big pharmaceutical company worth $2 billion is a lot stronger than a single guy like myself, with 5 kids.
So let's chew on that for just a moment. So they threatened you with lawsuit.
Yes,
Okay.
when we went to appeal the second time,
Mm-hmm.
they threatened us. Yeah, they threatened
With,
me and
with
said,
with
"Hey, we're going to come
lawsuit.
after you."
Okay. And of course, in this country, there are laws protecting people like you and like me. I was threatened with lawsuit once as well
Mhm.
for speaking out on behalf of the public good. And there are laws protecting us.
Right.
And the way these laws work, and ever so briefly, I I relied on with something called the anti-slap statute,
Mm,
which punishes companies who have found that they have done just that, have harassed a citizen simply for speaking out on behalf of the public good. So and that happened to me, but I'm wondering. So when Purdue threatened to sue you, what did you do?
I didn't do anything. I wasn't too
Hmm.
worried about it.
Okay.
Didn't have anything at the time for them to take that they could take away from me.
And
So
apparently they didn't sue you.
they didn't.
They
Nope.
only threatened. And
Right.
and and this is another important thing for our listeners, is that the big guys who I have compared to bullies and on a playground, they're big and they think they're smart and they actually make a lot of dumb mistakes. And one of the dumbest things they can do is threaten a citizen at large with lawsuit because it looks
Right.
really, really bad when they get caught doing
Mhm.
this. And so that happened to you. That happened to me. That happened to another one of my guests, who actually this company, it was a PFAS, a, a, a a chemical company that was poisoning her land with PFAS, Cape Fear. I don't
Mm.
remember what the chemical company was, but that can easily be looked up. But the chemical company threatened a citizen at large who happened to be a doctor with lawsuit, and they actually did file lawsuit. Well, they ended up settling under the um, under the condition that she not discuss the terms of the lawsuit and that she not discuss the lawsuit anymore. But this is what's great. I had so much fun interviewing that guest because she can't talk about it, but I can. I can talk and
Right.
talk and talk about it. And I spent a lot of the episode discussing how the big guys threaten you with lawsuit, but the odds are overwhelmingly it's just a threat. They're not going to go through with it. And if they do, they're going to either get embarrassed with having to settle, or worse. So, but anyway, but I'm very interested. Did Purdue do anything other than threaten you with lawsuit?
Not me personally.
Hmm.
That they did. And when it was over, I pretty much checked out on the whole subject matter. Didn't think about it too much. I mean, obviously, we all know that Purdue has gone through numerous other lawsuits that they've had to settle with a number of state governments. And then just last week, there was the big decision at the United States Supreme Court, which will now allow for the Sackler family to be held accountable for what their company did. So that's some good news. But really, I want people, I want whistleblowers to have the strength to know that whether you have brought a whistleblower case, against a company or against a government or organization who has committed fraud, who has brought harm to people, I just want people to know that, hey, there's a community of us out there and we have strength in numbers. And I want to hear their stories, whether they won or lost. I want to hear what they have to say. And that's kind of the impact that it now has on my life.
Very good. And again, the big guys, they're like I said, pretty much all they can do is beat their chests and complain and th make threats. They can't do anything. They can't do anything to you, if a citizen at large. That there are some cases where some people can get fired from their jobs. We're not discussing that sort of thing. You didn't want to work for Purdue anyway.
I will say though, after working there in pain management was really all that I learned while I was there. I really actually became a pretty, advocate for pain management for people and ended up having two more jobs. One with a compounding pharmacy where we would make topical, non-opioid, non-addictive pain creams for a variety of reasons. And also worked for a medical device company that had a product for neuropathic pain. So I became pretty passionate about the subject. I'm not passionate about what, the use of opioids, for that.
Listening to you speak just reminds me of, that's how the um the Sacklers succeeded in fooling so many people. They did it
Mhm.
under the cloak of we care. We care. We care about you and your pain. And it was all a sham. And it's so aggravating and annoying. I've read Big Pharma by Gerald Posner. I have not read Dope Sick by Beth Macy, but I did watch the entire miniseries. I feel like I've read the book, and that's what they did. They under the cloak and the disguise of we're here to help you.
I think
No,
I'm quoted in one of those books, if I'm not mistaken.
good, good. Perhaps in either Gerald Posner's book or in Beth Macy's
I
book.
think that's the one. I think that's the one that it is. Yes, and and
No,
and you're right about the Sacklers and the messaging that we had. I mean, actually, that you know, I it's a pretty strong psyop, for people to the way that the pharmaceutical companies manipulate people. It's they they are very powerful in the manipulation tools and I mean I believed in pain management so much that I ended up spending another 5 years working in that particular arena um, because I really did believe and it's important to treat pain, but looking back on it, you know I always tell people, don't hold it against me, but I worked for Purdue Pharma and I sold OxyContin, and I regret deeply what it did to my community, you know, and it's sad. I mean, I wish it had been I wish it had been one of the compounding pain creams that I ended up using, which is a whole nother story. Um, because those creams didn't cause barely any no side effects, but and definitely no addiction. So, but you're right. Purdue did it under the guise of, oh, we care, we care, we care, but really they were out for the money, and they spent years. I could tell you in the documentation that we got in discovery on my case, they spent a lot of effort um, arguing and trying to convince the medical community and the regulators why they should be using the 2-to-1 conversion instead of what the real conversion is, 1-to-1. and at best one to 1.5. But and the really what it boiled down to, as they would say in their emails back and forth to each other, we have a franchise to protect. So they were out there to protect their $2 billion baby. And they did a really good job at it. And
Go ahead
go
and
ahead.
finish. My question
I was
can
going to say,
wait.
I don't know why the product's still on the market, to be candid with you.
I know. I agree with you. It is still on the market, which is interesting. So I guess, well, anyway, I guess that's a conversation for another time, but it is
Mhm.
still on the market. What I was getting ready to point out is something that's really important to our listeners, that often the answers are right there in front of you if you just look. So my question to you, Steve, is if someone looked, would they have seen this conversion error if they really looked?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's how Mark Radcliffe first learned about, this conversion error because we were, it's like they use the Jedi mind trick on us in training. This is the conversion ratio. This is how you're going to go out there and sell it to the doctors. But what happened was the doctor actually gave Mark some pushback, and Mark said, basically recognized, had the epiphany at that moment. Yeah, wait, this doctor's right. So he took that pushback back to the executives at Purdue, and they basically ignored him,
Because
and
he was
basically
right.
said, no, no, you're going to sell the drug on the 2-to-1 conversion, and what that doctor is saying is wrong. But it wasn't just that one doctor.
Oh, of
We
course not.
had if I remember correctly, it was, I'll call it the equivalent of the Japanese version of the Food and Drug Administration. So
Okay.
whatever their equivalent was, whomever they were communicating with in email was also not buying that 2-to-1 conversion. There was a lot of pushback in the medical community, and I could see it in the emails that I read, upon discovery. But um, you know, yeah, they knew it. They knew it, and they said they have to protect their franchise.
Right. And but getting back to thank you for explaining that, and just getting back to my point that often in the big guys' own data, in
Mhm.
their data, there's your hook, your evidence that something wrong is going on. It's but you have to look. You have to look. Yeah, looking doesn't take a minute. It takes some research. It takes some effort, but it's not that hard to just look. This reminds me of a little. This is a little anecdotal, but in my battle with the Army Corps of Engineers, I educated myself on, just why the levees broke. I did some research. So I have to share this that I was at a meeting, and there happened to be a retired Army Corps gentleman at this event, and he asked me a question, and I responded with a very thought out, eloquent answer that took about a full minute. And he looked at me, he cocked his head and looked at me and said, "How did you know all that?" And I smiled and said in front of the whole audience, "I can read. I can read." And
Right.
it's there, but you gotta read it. And I could give you 5 examples in my very successful battle with the Army Corps of Engineers where I won because I read a document, or I read an article, or I read a report. I can read. So it beating the big guys is a lot easier than it may sound. Now, to be fair, the Purdue is one of the biggest of the big guys, one of the biggest of the big guys. So I don't mean to be belittling in any way. And obviously this battle that Steve, that you have done is even though you did everything right. You were hit with a technicality that you couldn't have foreseen.
Yeah, it was really unfortunate. Our case got dismissed for the last time on that technicality. literally just a couple of days before we were going to start deposing, Richard Sackler and Michael Friedman and some of the other executives of the company. And if I may say one more thing about the bottom
Oh, you
line
can
that it
say
hit,
as much as you want.
I was running some numbers the other day. And so basically, if you have a 2-to-1 conversion,
Hmm.
but the truth is it's really a 1-to-1 conversion. The way that they had the pricing set up with the product is that on a two, if 2-to-1 conversion was actually correct,
Okay.
um, because there was also a conversion of the fact that, let's say you had a 10, a 20, a 40, and an 80 milligram version of OxyContin, but then you have a 15, a 30, and a 60 milligram version of MS Contin. So you can play with the numbers on a number of different ways and really easily deceive somebody into the mathematics of, oh, yes, it is cheaper than MS Contin.
And they
But
did.
when a patient, yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. And when a patient has to take the medication over and over, and which then, if you're taking morphine over and over, it accumulates. Then once that accumulation happens, the conversion truly is a 1-to-1 conversion. What ends up happening is OxyContin becomes 1.6 times more expensive than MS Contin. So hence that becomes the fraud on everybody that had to pay for it. So if I needed to get a prescription of morphine for a month, and that prescription, let's say, um, uh, uh, was for 100 tablets of 60 milligrams. Well, I would be able to sell the doctor, oh, the patient's going to take a lot less OxyContin because it's twice as potent as morphine, but it's not.
But it's not.
So now, in order to get the same amount of pain relief that I would have gotten with morphine, I'm going to have to take 150 tablets of the OxyContin, and I'm going to end up on a 40 milligram to a 60 milligram conversion from OxyContin to morphine. I'm going to have to end up spending $245 more. That's a wholesale cost, actually, on my OxyContin. So now I estimate that that probably had at least $1 billion impact on the company's profitability. Now there would have to a mathematician who could run the numbers could verify that, but my point is the company became so much more profitable, you know, on this particular fraud. And that's why they ended up expanding so much. They went from, you know, 30 or 40 representatives, I think, in 1996 to over 600 representatives in
Wow.
2000.
Wow. Because of
They were able to
this.
expand because of
Because of this.
they were able
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
that
This
much more profitable.
this isn't well known. I don't remember hearing anything about this. I don't remember reading anything about this in Gerald Posner's book. This is really interesting stuff. Steve, if you could start all over again and go back in time, uh, would you have done anything differently regarding this lawsuit with Purdue?
Regarding the lawsuit, no.
Hmm.
I mean, I was looking back on, 5 years. I mean, my lawsuit, I didn't file my lawsuit for 5 years after I left Purdue, but I did so because knowing 5 years later, in fact, between 2006 and 2009, I worked at the Roanoke Rescue Mission, which is an organization that helps people with overcome drug and alcohol addictions.
Hmm.
And it working in that program with people who were coming out of addiction for drugs. A lot of my friends that I developed at that time, they were addicted to OxyContin, or they had
Wow.
members of their
Wow.
families who were addicted to OxyContin.
Mm.
And it just always, it broke my heart to see what it did to people. And no, I wouldn't have changed anything.
Good.
I would have
Good.
brought the lawsuit again,
Good. Good.
and
You would have brought it again. Good. I'm glad to hear
yep.
that. It's
And
so we're about
yep.
I was just getting ready to say we're about run out of time, but I wanted
Okay.
to find out if is there anything else that you feel you need to share with our listeners that you think they need to know?
Well, I'm starting my own podcast for whistleblowers. I would love for people to reach out to me if they want to tell their story of being a whistleblower. please reach out to me and I want to hear your story. Whether you won or lost, you've got a story to tell.
That is very uplifting. Steve May, thank you so much for being with us today.
All right. Thank you for having me.
You're
It's been a pleasure.
welcome. And thank you, the listeners, for joining us. I hope you like this episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Okay, stay with me.